Welcome to another video. Welcome to a dark easel video. So I thought for most people who just wanted to hear the Blade Runner theme, or whatever it's called, Decker's theme, Deckard, then there it is. So hopefully that's answered the question, can a dark easel do Blade Runner? Well, I think it can. Maybe you can leave in the comments what you think. And really, the reason I did this is because the dark easel, I mean, you look on YouTube, you look anywhere, okay, it's a wonderful ambient sound, basically a lot of interesting sound effects and things like that. That's what most people use it for. And the reason for that is it's predominantly West Coast oriented. I'm going to say that, even though they say no coast and things like that, there's no dedicated filter, there's no huge number of waveforms. It's not really set up for that. So that's why I decided let's try one of the most classical East Coast type sounding things you can do. So that beautiful sweeping, the detuned saw. Okay, reverb, doesn't matter where you get it from. But yeah, it's one of the things that I don't think I've ever heard a dark easel even attempt. So you know what? That's what we did it. And the amazing thing is, this setup doesn't have a saw wave, doesn't have a dedicated filter, doesn't have pretty much all the stuff required to build it, or build that sound. So how can you do it? And before we start, what you are hearing is exactly what I hear. That's my microphone there. Two incredibly expensive $15 USB speakers sat over there. All effects and everything has come from the dark easel. In other words, Strega comes to the party and does all that. So yeah, what you hear is what I hear. And so yeah, basically, just wanted to see if you could do it, and I think it sounds pretty good. So it proves that the total is greater than the sum of its parts, because each one of these devices individually is good, but you wouldn't necessarily write home about it and say this is your only synth, you'll never need another one. Whereas put the three together, and I tell you what, it gets close. For a single, I'll call this a single synth, yes, it's 3 modules, but for a single synth, this thing can do pretty much anything. Anyway, so how do you get a synth that doesn't have any of the building blocks to do a sound like that? So you get that lovely sound, the sort of that brassy, buzzy, detuned saw. I mean, okay, the reverb, there's any number of ways you can get it, but again, this is part of the device. How do you do it? Well, there are actually several ways you can do it. The way I've chosen, just for fun, is instead of using detuned saws, I've used pulse width modulation. A lot of people say, oh, that's nowhere near as good. Did you know that pulse width modulation is actually a sawtooth and a ramp? In other words, a sawtooth, like one sawtooth going that way, a ramp going, or sawtooth, ramp. When you mix those together slightly out of phase, the result is in fact a pulse width. It's like pulse width modulation, because when they're exactly in phase, they cancel each other out. So that means, pulse width of nothing. And when they're halfway along, they're exactly a square wave. Because, I mean, you can do the same yourself, do it on a piece of paper, work out. And that's why pulse width actually sounds like a detuned saw, because effectively it is a detuned saw. It's just one of them's a ramp, not a saw wave. Yeah, the other thing you can do is you can create sawtooths on the no coast in several ways. You can put linear feedback of a square wave into a triangle, creates a saw. You can use the slope circuit with infinite attack and decay. You can do the same thing over here. The Strega's oscillator actually has a shape knob which goes basically to a saw. You can do a saw with the oscillator there, the jack of all trades module, and you could do that. But I think it actually sounds nicer like this. Now the next thing is you say, okay, you don't have a filter, so you can't obviously get a nice sweeping sound. You do have a filter. Everyone keeps saying it. The low pass gate, the dynamics as it's called in this, is a low pass filter plus a VCA. The other thing is, if you have a look carefully, there's a line. Now that line is where the VCA and the VCF are both in sync. In other words, both of them are getting bigger or louder or higher, depending on what your frame of reference is, until that line. Past that line, the VCA is reached 100%. It's just the filter. Now there's not much filtering, but for example, if we take our sound, it's got that buzz. If I put it back to the line, it's lost the buzz. And obviously you can go lower and it goes softer. And you know a trick? If you want a certain filter, a filter sound like the maximum, all you do is just make it louder, and then you bypass the VCA. But anyway, so for this one, if you were to put it all the way up, I think that sounds too buzzy. So for my money, the best was just about there-ish. And then you get the... And of course I've just confused myself, because for those who noticed, you've only got 8 notes on this thing, but I actually tuned both rows, so I changed halfway through. Now hopefully you're all listening to the melody and you missed that completely, but anyone who's actually watching would have seen it. So see on the oscilloscope, there's the pulse width modulation, and it's beautiful pulse width. So how do we do it? We'll just very quickly go through how this patch was made. Now, I'm not going to pull all the bits out and everything, but I'll just go through and show you so that people can do this on their own. So first thing is our sound, or our pitch comes out either that one, or when you change it to that one, it goes to the oscillator. It also goes to the math section. I'll explain why in a minute, but for now we'll look at this. So we have our pitch, we take the square wave of the pitch and we trigger our slope circuit. Now the reason for that is you can get a really nice square wave out of the slope circuit by getting to the end of cycle. And what that means is as soon as the cycle's finished, that goes on, and during the cycle it's off. Now, depending on and the cycle finishes at the rise, so basically when the attack has finished. So depending on the ratio of attack to decay, that will give you a pulse width. Okay, so what you can do is you can set very fast attack and very slow, or not very slow, slowish decay, and then you can change the time, and the time will determine the pulse width. Let's show you. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn down the Strega. So it's now, that's without reverb, okay? And I'll explain that later. So basically, we've got the pitch, so, and we can prove that. I'll keep knocking that wire. If we go, that's the normal oscillator. So you can do multiply. So that's the normal oscillator. This is the output. Okay, now if I was to get rid of the time input, all you see is the ratio of off to on. Now the trick here is, as you clock it, the speed of clocking it changes, but the time of the pulse doesn't. So in this particular case, the pulse is actually the low part. So if you have a look at how long it does change, but not very much. And so what happens is the pulse width's actually different depending on the note. So what you do is you also put the note CV into our math section, and by doing that, so what I'll do is take that one. By doing that, if you have a look, the pulse width is almost the same. Okay, it's not perfect because it's not a volt per octave. Now, by putting in an oscillator, and this is a triangle oscillator, so we've programmed up the speed to be quite slow, what's actually going to happen is we're going to modify the time, which means as you modify the time, it will shrink and expand that pulse. Now, if you have a look, I can change the amount, so it's going to be close to 0. So depending on the amount of time I put in, that changes the pulse, or the length of the pulse width. You can also change the fall, and that changes sort of the direction, like how close it is. So you might be blocking everything. I'm changing the fall. So see how it stays to one side and doesn't go all the way to the other? And you can keep twisting that until you basically get where you want. So, and because we're changing with pitch, it means it's consistent. So there you are. So there is our actual pulse width modulation. Okay, filtering, because we still got to have that filter sound. Now, normally you use the contour for doing this. And what I can do is if I take out that, this is now using the contour, we'll gate the contour. So, and you might say, again, that sounds great. Remember, there's no reverb, so it doesn't have that lovely trailing off. But one trick with this contour is it always gets to the end of the attack phase. So, for example, so hopefully you notice that. So it doesn't stop the note when you take your finger off. So that you may not like, but come to the rescue, our jack of all trades. So that little module up there, my favorite module on the device, I think. It can be an LFO, it can be a gate, it can be a slew generator, and it just works. This particular one, it's really just an attack, sustain, release. So when you tap the note, oh, and of course you'd have to actually attach the dynamics. So sustain, release. But remember the last test? So this will only attack while the gate's on. And what that means is when you're doing things like you can actually do some performance. So that's why I chose that one for the contour. And we've gone through the filter. So it is a real filter. And again, if you don't filter the sound out completely, so let's so what we're going to do is we've got rid of the movement, the pulse width. Okay. Now see, it's getting softer, but it's filtering. That's not a square. When we go to the 1-to-1, still not a square, it's still rounded. When we go all the way, that's a perfect square. So that last little bit, that's still filtering. And in our case, because we've got a slow onset, it actually sounds like a proper filter effect. So you just choose how much buzz you want, and there you go. Now, okay, so that's the sound. Actually, if I put this back in, so we get pulse width modulation. The last part, Strega. I'm not using any oscillators or things from Strega at the moment. I'm just going straight through from the dynamics, straight in. And yes, you can over amplify and get distortion, but I'm not. I'm just getting the raw signal going into the time effects, which is basically a delay. Now, that's the delay speed. They've got it so that it can go from very slow to very fast. When it's about 12 o'clock, I find that just sounds like reverb. The filter can just change the sound a bit. The slower you go, the more you've got to filter it, or you just end up with noise because the filter's going, well, the delay's going so slow that it can't handle the high frequencies. Absorb, it can have some interesting effects, like even pseudo-resonance, but I always turn that down. That's how big your space is, so your feedback level is basically how much reverb, and then the wet and dry. So we'll put it not fully. So now we get back to our so now you know how it's done. Okay, this is where you cheat, so put it to the second row. So I've now tuned the second row. You've just noticed that's... So, yeah. Tune that one, and... And there you go. So, can a dark easel do Blade Runner? I think so. Leave a note in the comments to see if you think it actually could do it as well. Thanks for watching, and I'm going to be doing a couple more videos on the dark easel, probably going through each of the sections in more depth. This is an awesome synthesizer. It can do far more than people give it credit for. So look forward to that, and we'll see you in the next one. Okay, thanks.